What do you know? I'm late to the party yet again. I saw this movie almost a week ago, and I'm only just now sitting down to record my review on it. Um, there's been a lot going on for me behind the scenes, like there always is, and I keep saying I'm going to be consistent, and I'm going to keep giving you guys regular uploads. Well, you should know by now that that's never going to be true. I'm not lying when I say that. I truly do believe I'm going to do that, and then things start happening. But I've got a bunch of videos in my backlog that I'm going to spend this weekend editing up until Super Bowl. I'm going to be editing through these videos and getting them out to you as best I can. Some of them were recorded 9 months ago, and so they're a little bit outdated, but it's... So that was my phone. 1 second. Yeah, a lot of the videos are probably going to be outdated, but the problem is I would have to completely re-record them with the current information, and for some of them, I don't remember what I said at all, and won't until I actually put them in the shop and get them ready for you. All that out of the way, let's talk about Iron Lung. I want to go in saying that I don't know much about the game. I didn't even watch Mark play it when it first came out. I watched maybe the first 2 or 3 minutes of the video. The game looked really boring to me, and I wasn't interested. But when I found out that he was going to be making his directorial debut adapting that game for the big screen, I was fascinated, because Mark has been saying since the channel, which shall not be named, ended, that he wants to go bigger. He wants to take things more seriously, work on bigger productions similar to things like A Heist with Markiplier, A Date with Markiplier, Who Killed Markiplier, In Space with Markiplier. And if you've seen those, then you know he loves crafting these worlds with these big characters and writing these intricate, interconnected stories. All of that stuff has been really good, but most of it has been from a comedy standpoint. That's what A Heist with and In Space with has mostly been. Those are like the bigger productions with a lot of money thrown at them by YouTube, but they are still comedic. But he did show that he's a talented writer and editor when it comes to stuff like that, because those are really well made, I think. But something like Iron Lung is completely different. This is completely self-financed, which I think is really inspiring. I admire it in him the same way that I admire it in M. Night Shyamalan. That being said, I liked this movie a lot more than I like a lot of M. Night Shyamalan's recent movies. So let's talk about the meat and potatoes of this film. One thing that's tricky about a movie like this is that Mark has to do all of the heavy lifting. He's pretty much the only character that you spend any significant amount of time with. You hear voices over the intercom, so you get to know those personalities and those characters through the things that they say, but you don't really see very many other people. And when you do, it's for a very brief amount of time. And that's interesting because the whole purpose is to give you the feeling of being welded into this little shitty submarine like Mark's character Simon is in this film. And to that end, I think the movie does a very good job of making you feel boxed in and claustrophobic, especially in certain sequences. And it's very well committed to this idea, because there's nothing throughout the entire movie that you are shown or that you see that Simon cannot also see from where he is. Even when we do get a glimpse of what things look like outside the submarine, we're seeing it from inside the submarine. We don't get any perspective that Simon does not get. I really appreciate that. I love that commitment. It reminds me of that movie Buried with Ryan Reynolds from way back in the day. I'm sure that there are other movies like that that give you that sense of isolation and claustrophobia. I just am not able to summon any to my mind right now. That's the one that I draw the most parallels to. That being said, though, if you're gonna be trapped in this box with this one guy for 2 hours, his performance better be incredible. And I think that it gets there. I will say that Mark, I think, needed some time to get comfortable with this role. It took him a little while to settle into it. I don't know, it's like the first half hour or so, it felt like his performance came across as overly cold and like he was trying a little bit too hard. to, I don't know, distance the Simon character from his online persona as Markiplier. I don't know. And one thing that I experienced when I was playing Dispatch is, like, whenever Punch Up or Sonar are talking, I just hear Jacksepticeye and Critical. You know, like, I imagine that for people who aren't familiar with these these people, that the characters are just who they are. But for me, having known these voices for many years by this point, it's hard for me to get them out of my mind when I hear the performance. I was worried about that when it came to Mark in this movie. I was worried that throughout the entire length of it, I would just see Markiplier, especially because, like, the poster for the movie says a film by Markiplier. It doesn't say a film by Mark Fishbach. It says a film by Markiplier. So he's not, like, shying away from that fact. And he is credited as Mark Fishbach in the actual end credits of the film, which is cool, I guess. But to his credit, as the movie went on, I did occasionally forget that it was Markiplier that I was looking at. However, when the performance gets a bit larger than life and he starts screaming and he's angry and he's shouting, it just feels like the same Mark that was raging at getting over it back in the day, you know? And maybe that's just a testament to how well he's able to portray his anger, that it does remind you so vividly of when he's really, truly angry. But, I mean, you know, nonetheless, the main reason that you're watching this movie is because you're familiar with Mark. And I don't think that most people are going to be able to forget that they're looking at Markiplier when they look at Simon. One thing that I do really like, though, is what I assume is the actual gameplay loop of the game. Once you're, like, cut off from the intercom voice and you're just in this blood ocean with with Simon, and he's just driving the submarine around and taking these pictures. That's another thing that I really liked, is that the only way that you get to see what's in this blood ocean, you get to see what's, like, directly outside of outside of Simon's perspective, is he presses this little button and it takes an X-ray picture of what's directly in front of him, and that's the only way that you know what's going on. It's also the only way that you see the primary antagonistic force of this movie. It's some sort of, like, eldritch Lovecraftian creature, and it starts to play mind games with Simon. And so a lot of, like, the intrigue of this movie is trying to figure out what's really happening, and what's, you know, just part of the delusions being planted in his mind by this creature. That aspect is fun, because it makes you start wondering, like, was this particular moment where things started going, you know, left for him? And from that moment, did anything that we saw actually happen? We don't know. And that's definitely by design. I go back and forth on stuff like that a lot, because I think that there needs to be, in, like, Inception, right? You have a movie, and look, I'm not gonna sit here and say that Markiplier needs to be on the same level as Christopher Nolan in his first movie. Calm down. I'm just saying that in a movie like Inception, there are visual cues and hints left in the frame that for you to see and be like, okay, I know that's a dream sequence. And that's why the ending is left open-ended, because the top keeps spinning. It never stops spinning in the shot. So you're left to wonder, is he dreaming or not? Iron Lung, I think, needs something more than what is given in order to help discern what's true or not, because if you're, I don't know, like Fight Club has that same sort of thing, right? But in a movie like Iron Lung, when 90 minutes of the movie could be real or could not be, when you know that certain things aren't, but, like, you have no idea about the rest of it, it's just like, I don't know, I would have liked a little bit more commitment to showing me that certain things are real, because the entire ending sequence of the film could have been fake. We have no idea. It could have just been in his mind. He could have, I mean, the character could have died halfway through, and all of that was, like, him daydreaming as he crosses over the veil, you know? Like, there's just no way to know. And for some people that might be really rewarding. For me, not quite so much. But as I was saying, the movie is at its most interesting when he gets into what I assume is the gameplay loop, and he's just taking pictures, because I think that the way that the information is presented to you is really interesting and unique, especially for a film with this premise. you just get to see little glimpses of what's outside at a time. And that's where the horror aspect comes from. And I admire the commitment to the concept of, like, you only get to see when he's taking these pictures, but that also creates limitations. That's the only thing that creates any sort of glimpse of light for a lot of stretches of this movie. So he has to figure out a way to keep that button pressed down. I love that limitations breed creativity. I think that there's so much in this movie that is so creative. Mark definitely has the sauce when it comes to directing. Writing, maybe not so much, but directing, he's got some ideas, he's got some concepts, and he wants to show how much he loves the art form. And I respect the hell out of that. I think that between this and, like, you know, Talk to Me and Shelby Oaks, I think that there's a very interesting pipeline from YouTuber to horror film creator. And I think it's, I don't know, I just think it's really interesting here. There's a lot of things about this movie that are really interesting. However, one thing that I will also say is I don't necessarily think it has a lot of rewatch value. When I was watching it, I was like, you know, I would like to buy this on Blu-ray once that becomes available, but I realized I'm probably not going to watch it, though. Like, I'll buy it to support Mark, but I'm like, I don't know, I feel as though I got everything out of it the first time I watched it, and to that end, the movie does feel too long, which also adds to why it doesn't necessarily feel rewatchable. The game is like 30 minutes long, and the movie is 4 times that. And so obviously, there's a lot of superfluous stuff that's been added. We're like expanding the lore and all that stuff. The basic premise, from what I understand, is that some time ago there was an event called the Quiet Rapture, where all of the planets and the stars in the solar system vanished, and the only people that are left alive are the ones that were on space stations. And now, maybe this is connected, maybe it's not, there are blood oceans on moons, and so they send these submarines down into the blood oceans to see what's down there and see if it can help them figure things out. If you ask me, I think that the blood oceans are the least interesting part of that premise. I would much rather like to know what happened during the Quiet Rapture. There's a part where Simon's character, where Simon says, Simon says, Jesus Christ. There's a part where he's like, is it more likely that all of the planets and stars went missing, or that a couple space stations went missing? And I think that that question leads to a much more compelling story, a movie about anything, really, rather than a movie where very little actually happens. It's not to say that I'm some TikTok-brained, you know, like, I need constant things happening to stay invested in a film. One of my favorite movies last year was Frank Is Not For Crying Out Loud. I just think that there's a difference between a slow burn and a movie that is just kind of boring. And I think that this one leads a little bit more towards being kind of boring in a lot of places. But that's just me. Overall, though, I think that this movie has a lot going for it. And it does make me want to see more out of Mark. I want to see him continue to make movies and continue to show his love for the art form. I don't know where he's going with this next. I also think it's interesting that there's a, Exit 8 movie coming out this year, and a Mortuary Assistant movie coming out this year, so it's like, indie horror games are just getting adaptations left and right. I blame Five Nights at Freddy's. But yeah, if I were to throw this thing in the 1 to 10 meter, I'd give it a 7. I think it's a perfectly alright movie. Not extraordinarily good, but also not as ghastly as I've heard people saying that it is online. People on Twitter acting like this movie is like Morbius levels of boring, and I'm like, okay, let's calm down a little bit. But Iron Lung, that's my opinion of it. Have you seen it? What'd you think about it? Let me know in the comments down below. And I don't know, what do I usually say at the end of these videos? Can you help me out with that?